Do you remember where you were the first time you heard a noise that didn't seem to fit in the world? A sound so dissonant, so out of place, that it made your skin crawl before your brain even understood what it was? Some say this kind of crack, that vibration of wood splintering, or the sudden screech of brakes on asphalt, settles into your chest like a pre-programmed warning, an ancient trigger that screams, something irreparable is about to happen. Pay attention. That's exactly what rang in the ears of those living on Rua do Cedro on a sultry December night, when a dry, almost electric crack echoed from inside house number 47. Those with the lights on felt a shiver first. Those already asleep trembled in their pillows and, without knowing why, squeezed their eyes tighter. The next day, the entire street would discover that, inside that house with its freshly painted white picket fence, had been living for just a few months 7-year-old Elisa Morais, newly arrived from another city, fatherless, with a radiant smile that was only surpassed by the scars always hidden on her left forearm. That night of the crack, however, no one knew anything beyond the disturbing sound that seemed to announce an invisible crack crossing the sky. It was the baker Joachim, who later recounted staring at the ceiling of his bedroom until dawn, his heart pounding. He didn't have children, but he swore that if he had, he would have run to the crib at that moment. Mrs. Aline, who lived next door to Elisa and her mother, said she smelled smoke, something no one else did, and, startled, opened the window but saw no flames or embers. She quickly closed it, attributing it all to a dream. And so, under suspicions no one understood, the street began to carry a faceless foreboding. It was only 3 days later, when the police knocked on door 47, that there was enough silence for each resident to feel an uncomfortable phrase lodge itself in the back of their tongue. Perhaps that noise had indeed been a call for help. The investigation began without fanfare, as at first glance, there was no disappearance, no body, not even a crime. There was only one teacher, Mrs. Livia Costa, who had noticed Elisa's absence from class for 2 consecutive days, and upon calling the student's mother, Juliana Morais, received disjointed responses, sentences punctuated by suppressed sobs. She hung up, distraught. Juliana had seemed trembling, as if each syllable weighed more than the world. Late in the afternoon, the teacher decided to walk to the family's house. It was just a block up from the school, and found the door ajar, the hallway in darkness, the television muted. She clapped her hands, called Elisa's name, called her mother's, but there was no response. It was then that something, perhaps the memory of the loud bang everyone was talking about, prompted her to call the police before even crossing the threshold. When the first patrol car pulled up in front of the white picket fence, no sirens blared, no tactical lights lit. The officers, 2 young men still inexperienced, decided to enter through the front after obtaining permission from the neighbor, who confirmed the absence of noise in the house since morning. Beds were untouched, dirty dishes in the sink, a broken glass on the kitchen floor, the toes of children's sandals near the back door, as if they had been kicked in a hurry. It was the classic scene of a broken home. Yet, there were no overt signs of violence. An officer went into the backyard and found the clothesline hanging with adult clothes, no children's clothing. In the hallway, on a wooden sideboard, rested a photo of Elisa wearing a butterfly costume, purple wings, a shy smile, eyes that held a silent question. The officer looked away at first. Then, a tingling sensation rose in the back of his neck. He had grown up in foster homes. He knew how to recognize sadness disguised in a child's smile. Meanwhile, the mother was nowhere to be found. Calls went straight to voicemail. A quick search of local hospitals yielded no results. Someone suggested searching the attic, but the house was single-story. The suspicion remained that mother and daughter might have left in a hurry and suffered an accident on the road. The police, however, remembered the popping sound, Mrs. Aline saying she smelled imaginary smoke. If there had been a fire, it would have left traces, and indeed there was. In the corner of the yard near the back fence, the grass was scorched in an irregular circle, as if someone had lit a hasty bonfire. In the center, darkened pieces of melted duct tape. They lacked the experience to draw immediate conclusions, but they were prudent. They called for backup, requested forensic analysis, and cordoned off the house. For the first time, at least officially, the community of Rua do Cedro heard the word missing associated with the name of a child who always seemed to exist outside the eyes of adults. The news spread like wildfire. A girl disappears. Her mother is nowhere to be found. Neighbors recall a strange noise. Television stations set up cameras on the corner. Reporters raised microphones, and the white facade became a backdrop for conjecture. Mrs. Aline, who hadn't left her house without makeup in years, gave a tearful statement, recounting the smell of smoke, the endless knocking she'd heard in the walls for the past few weeks. Deaf, intermittent sounds, sometimes thin, like a ball bouncing, sometimes hollow, like something heavy being dropped. She said she never suspected anything. She repeated 3 times, "If I'd known, I would have done something." She held a pink handkerchief to her trembling nose. At home, she would hug her husband and confess to feeling relieved as she uttered those words into the microphone. It was like freeing herself from a secret she didn't even understand she was carrying. By this point, investigators had tracked down Juliana Maurice's background. Originally from another city, she had moved 4 months earlier, had a series of short-term jobs, no close relatives except an uncle in a distant rural area, and a closed domestic violence case against her late husband, who had died in still unclear circumstances after falling down a ladder. The investigation had ruled it a suicide, but details were sketchy. Bruises in varying stages of healing on Juliana's arms. Neighbors who swore they heard intense arguments in the early hours of the morning, muffled calls for help. Nothing was confirmed. Her husband was eventually buried, the case closed, and Juliana, with her young daughter, disappeared from her hometown without leaving a home address. Chief Detective Vinicius Prado read the file in the early hours of the morning at the police station, illuminated by fluorescent lights that gave the paper a sickly hue. Finally, he took a deep breath, closed the file, and stared into space for several long minutes. She was familiar with stories like this. Women who carried invisible cuts inside, children who inherited scars without ever choosing to participate in the game. If Juliana harbored monsters within herself, Elisa might have lived with them daily. As investigations progressed, Rua do Cedro underwent a transformation. Baker Joaquim began opening his bakery half an hour early to spy on police cars. Children were banned from playing on the sidewalk after 6. Gates began to be double-locked. Mr. Anselmo, retiree with a thick mustache, installed 2 security cameras on the wall, one facing the street, the other the garden. It was as if, out of fear, each resident reinforced their boundaries, erecting internal walls capable of warding off the echo of that name, Elisa. Yet, paradoxically, everyone wanted to know details. What color her eyes were, how she behaved in the living room, whether she cried softly or loudly, whether she bit her nails, whether she laughed easily. There seemed to be a tacit pact to fill the absence with invented details, perhaps to lessen the guilt of not having noticed her sooner. When the school portrait circulated in the media, Elisa smiling in her blue uniform, her hair tied to the side, a chorus of exclamations swept through the neighborhood. I've seen her walking by with her backpack, so polite. I heard her humming at the gate the other day. Soon, the girl became so vividly embedded in the collective memory that, for many, it was as if they had lived with her forever. Vinicius, for his part, didn't allow himself to be tainted by the haze of sensationalist commotion. He knew that every hour counted in the search for a child. It was a cruel statistic. After 48 hours, the chances of finding her alive plummeted like planes without wings. In Elisa's case, it was almost 70. He gathered the team in a windowless room and projected a map of the city onto the whiteboard, concentric circles indicating search perimeters. He assigned tasks: check toll cameras, interview ride-hailing drivers, sweep junkyards, inquire at motels, cross-reference lists of recent guests in cheap hotels. Nothing. With each negative result, time seemed to swallow another block of hope. It was then that a curious fact emerged. On the morning of her alleged disappearance, security cameras at the central bus station recorded Juliana walking quickly, without any luggage, carrying only a cloth bag. She entered the women's restroom at 7:43 a.m., left at 7:56 a.m., went to a newsstand, bought matches, hailed a taxi outside, and disappeared. The taxi driver described Juliana as anguished, almost feverish. She asked him to stop at a popular market 5 blocks away, where she bought 2 bottles of liquid alcohol and returned to the car. From the market, she drove to a vacant lot on the outskirts of the city. The taxi driver refused to enter the store because the streets were dirt and it was raining. He had dropped Juliana off on the corner around 8:30 a.m. He waited a few minutes, but she didn't return. At 8:45 a.m., he left. Vinicius heard the story and felt the same tingling sensation on the back of his neck that the young police officer had felt when he saw Elisa's photo. That story bore the signature of something best not approached without gloves to protect the soul. However, he had no choice. It was his duty to dive in. When a squad entered the vacant lot at 6 o'clock the next morning, accompanied by sniffer dogs, they found campfire remains, melted glass, and charred colored pencils, one red and one blue stuck together by the high temperature. Nearby, a rectangle of freshly turned earth. They dug in silence, sweating, praying, some to find it, some not to. The body wasn't there. Instead, a child's blanket adorned with little stars emerged. Beneath it, a teddy bear, its head lolling to the side, as if it had melted into the foam inside. It wasn't a corpse, but the sight was enough to make Sergeant Romalio vomit into the bushes. In the scattered, disorderly footprints, a pattern was evident. An adult pair, a barefoot child's. The adult's footprints went in and out. The child's only reached the blanket. They searched for tracks again, called in drones, and expanded the perimeter. perimeter. Nothing. The smell of alcohol still permeated the air, mixed with damp leaves. Vinicius held his breath. Here was proof that something had happened. But the outcome remained loose in the wind, like the smoke Mrs. Aline swore she'd smelled. The next twist came from an unlikely place. A delivery driver had remembered seeing Juliana 2 days earlier in an alley, exchanging crumpled bills with a thin man with a barbed wire tattoo on his neck. The tattoo led him to a name, Caio Serrano, with a long criminal record, known for selling fake documents and illegal flights. Under questioning, Caio let out a gnarled laugh. He said he didn't know any explanation, but when promised a reduced sentence, he admitted to providing, in exchange for 1,000 reis and a gold chain, a passport signed in Elisa Moraes' name, but with a photo of another child. When I saw that girl, I knew right away. Her mother wanted to make her disappear or disappear from her. Either way, disappear, he recounted, twirling the steel handcuff chain as if it were a jewel. According to Caio, Juliana had demanded discretion and had received, in addition to the passport, a bottle of black-labeled pills. She said she needed to get her daughter to sleep the entire trip. She didn't want any crying, tantrums, or anything. The detective wrung out every detail of the story, but Caio claimed not to know the destination or time. The clue, however, whether true or not, threw the chronology of events into disarray. If Juliana was trying to escape, why stick to her own town buying alcohol and matches? The contradiction pushed the team into new alleys. Meanwhile, the media transformed Elisa into a national symbol. Hashtags abounded, along with donation campaigns, outrage slogans, and candlelight vigils. The child's portrait graced school bulletin boards, television screens, and social media profiles. The more exposure, the more pressure on the police. The more pressure, the more silence the evidence. Vinicius began to dream about the girl. In one of them, she appeared in an open field, running, purple butterfly wings on her back. He called to her, but his voice wouldn't come out. The girl laughed, turned, and in place of eyes were two reflections of distant, blinding headlights. He would wake with a start, gasping for breath, the echo of her laughter still reverberating in his throat. He began popping caffeine pills under his tongue, skipping meals, revisiting testimonies, like someone sifting through rubble in search of something shiny. Little by little, scenes began to line up. The bonfire in the backyard, the purchase of alcohol, the passport, the footprints in the vacant lot, the crack in the sultry night. All that was missing was a straight line, for the story was circular, always returning him to the same blind spot. Where was Elisa? The answer arrived, as so often, by chance. A rookie police officer tasked with compiling anonymous tips noticed 2 calls registered at different times from the same payphone near a nearby psychiatric hospital. The voice female clip kept repeating the same phrase. She stuck where no one will look because it seems empty. Investigators went to the hospital and interviewed staff members who recalled treating a woman wearing a gray sweatshirt with fresh cuts on her arm. She had asked for a bandage and claimed to have tripped in the bathroom at home. She left in less than half an hour, leaving behind a crumpled piece of paper with the logo of a rundown inn on the outskirts. Vinicius went there at dusk, accompanied by just 2 officers. He didn't want to make a fuss. The receptionist looked at Juliana's photo and confirmed that she had stayed 3 nights earlier, paid in cash, and left before dawn. He said he'd heard strange sounds in the room, hurried footsteps, running water, something being dragged, and finally, a heavy silence, the kind of silence that seems to creak in the corners. In the room's trash, they found sedative labels, pieces of electrical tape, cotton threads, and a good amount of tangled children's hair. Vinicius clenched his fist. The crooked line of the narrative took on an ominous clarity. It was at the intersection of that clue with the older one, the story of the near fire in Juliana's backyard, that the final click occurred. What if the fire hadn't been intended to destroy, but to test? What if Juliana wanted to know how long it would take to consume a certain material? He called forensic experts back to the backyard, this time with reagents capable of detecting traces of low-temperature combustion. They discovered that the charred circle contained not only alcohol residue, but also fragments of fireproof plastic for children, the kind used in car seat locks. Juliana could have tested the strength of the flames there before improvising something larger. All that remained was to find where she could repeat the experiment on a larger scale. On Wednesday afternoon, residents of the industrial zone on the other side of town reported a strong smell of burning rubber coming from an abandoned warehouse. The fire brigade arrived quickly, containing scattered pockets of smoke in metal drums. Among the charred objects were 2 sleeping bags stuck together by the flames, empty water bottles, and a soaked notebook. Experts detected drag marks, silk threads from children's costumes, and a pair of melted slippers. When Vinicius's team entered, the air was acrid and suffocating. No bodies, but the walls bore palm prints made with soot or dried blood. Impossible to tell. In a corner, the detective found something that made made his stomach drop. A purple ribbon, stained with gray, flecked with glitter. A child's butterfly wing. The symbol of the party photo. The ultimate link between past and present. The question was no longer whether Elisa was alive, but how long she had been. Juliana was found 2 hours later, walking dazed on a shoulder of the road, barefoot, her clothes bloodied, her gaze distant. When approached, she couldn't resist. She mumbled in loose sentences, I didn't want to, but I needed to erase everything. During the interrogation, she stammered that Elisa carried the shadow of her dead father in her eyes, and that, with each passing day, it became harder to see her own daughter there. She said she had tried to run away, but wherever she went, the memory followed her. She tried to burn toys, clothes, sheets. She tried to sedate her daughter, to make her sleep soundly. She tried to disappear with her documents, to reinvent herself in another city. In the end, she concluded that only by erasing what existed outside and inside her would she find peace. Vinicius listened breathlessly. Juliana confessed, but the details remained hazy. Was it an admission of guilt or a belated request for care? They asked where Elisa's body was. Juliana closed her eyes. She's not in any body. She's tired and will turn to dust like me, he replied, before breaking down in convulsive tears that lasted 5 hours. Without the body being located, there was no end. Justice demanded a body or certainty. Experts reopened the warehouse and analyzed cubic centimeters of ash. In microfragments, they found childlike bone tissue, compatible with ages between 6 and 8. They collected DNA samples from the hairbrush that remained in House 47. It was Elisa. The scientific proof sealed Juliana's legal fate. But for Vinicius, and silently, for all of Rua do Cedro, nothing was resolved. The detective sat for nights at the wheel in front of the house with a white picket fence, watching the swing of an empty swing in the backyard, hearing, perhaps, echoes of laughter he had never witnessed. And he wondered, as every resident had wondered since the initial explosion, at what precise second could someone have listened more closely and transformed that tragedy into a different story? Would the street once again welcome children playing? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I would never forget that sometimes danger does not come disguised as a monster, but in the weary face of the one it should love. When the press declared the case closed, the cameras disappeared, the public focused its indignation on the next scandal, and collective memory was relieved to finally have a measurable outcome. The guilty party convicted, the child dead, the chapters closed. Still, one summer night at 9:30 p.m., the exact time when months earlier Elisa had gone to bed for the last time, Mrs. Aline woke from a strange dream. She swore she heard a low, childish laugh in the garden, followed by a soft crack, as if paper wings were beating in the air. She got up, went to the window, and searched the darkness for any sign. She saw only the long shadows of the pillars of the old house's white fence. For a moment, she thought one of them resembled the silhouette of a girl wearing purple wings. Blinking was enough for the figure to dissolve. Aline then clutched the pink scarf to her chest, the same one she had used in the TV interview, and cried for the first time without cameras nearby, finally understanding that some absences are noises that never cease, and that certain lives, though short, become infinite in the consciousness of those who, too late, learn to listen.